And I
Yeah,
was lucky
definitely.
too. There's a lot of Chinese scholars who have written stuff that have been translated into English, or they've written in
Mm,
English, thank God.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's not loads, unfortunately.
Mm.
It's just one of the annoying things about the period. Like, you know, Andrew knows all about this. A lot of the studios, when they shut down, everything was burned or chucked away.
Yeah.
Or just left to
Yeah,
rot.
yeah. So there's
Yeah.
loads of history. There's just loads of films that you just can't find anymore. Okay, so for everyone who's here right now, welcome to the very first Fighting Spirit online seminar. This is about the cultural history, cultural impact of martial arts films. Firstly, you can find more information about Fighting Spirit Film Festival on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram if you just search for us. You can also sign up for our mailing list at our website, fightingspiritfilmfestival.com. If you want to follow us for future events, we will have more online seminars coming up. I'll say that again at the end for the people who haven't joined yet. So we do have a couple. There's definitely one I'm planning at the moment, so hopefully this will become a regular event. So firstly, I want to introduce our erstwhile panel. So let's start with Meredith, who comes from Melbourne. Meredith is the author of an amazing book about Shaw Brothers, Meredith Lewis, Ask for the Moon, which I've read recently and is very good. Then next we have Andrew Heskins, who is the founder of Eastern Kicks.
Hello.
Advisor to the China Visual Festival as well, which was online this year, was it? Or was it?
We're still working out what to do.
Yeah, so we, when it comes to the screening thing. So
and
Andrew,
also we do a podcast as well now, Eastern Kicks.
Oh yes, of course, the Eastern Kicks podcast. Andrew's a
Could plug
veteran
that
of
while
the,
I can.
yeah, no, fair enough. Andrew's the veteran of the scene here, so a very familiar face to many of you, I think, based in the UK. Then we have Josh Toussaint-Strauss, who is a journalist at The Guardian, a video journalist, I should say, video producer and journalist. Recently made a video called Why Black People Love Kung Fu, and a follow-up, The Last Dragon as well. Is it The Last Dragon? Yeah, made a follow-up film about The Last Dragon.
We got a lot of stick for leaving it out, so I had to.
Yeah, I know. That's a classic.
Yeah,
it's a classic
Yeah.
film.
Well, there was too much to say, so I couldn't. Anyway,
yeah, it's a very beloved film in the genre, but we'll get to that. And lastly, I want to introduce Marlon Palmer, who is the founder of Kush Films and a proper veteran of the UK film scene in terms of distribution, working amongst labels as well. So welcome, Marlon.
Oh, welcome. Hi to everyone.
So thanks for joining us. So quick introduction here. Now, the reason behind doing the seminar for me was after I watched Josh's video when it came out last year, I found it really interesting because it's a perspective that I'd never heard before. So for me, growing up as a big fan of the films, I never realized the impact it had on the communities. So after I messaged Josh and we met up and we had a really good chat, and we kind of had the idea brewing because I wanted to take a real deep dive into this topic of how martial arts films affected people around the world outside of Hong Kong. Because I think for a lot of fans, we know how it affects sort of Hong Kong culture or Chinese film culture, and some maybe Western film culture as well. So people know how it affects us, like sort of the making of Western films, maybe not loads. But when we look at the actual cultural impacts and we talk about how it impacted communities, that's something that's not been talked about very much. Generally, and I know all of you who've researched significantly on these topics, there isn't much information about these generally. So with that in mind, I put this panel together because I wanted to just dedicate some real time to this and really talk about the subjects. And so there's going to be a lot of sort of talk about personal experiences too, and then as much history as we can draw on to link everything together. But I think it's going to be one of the sort of very first deep dives into the topic that exists, really. Hopefully, anyway, if we can get this going. So when we talk about martial arts films, there really is, with the history of it, if we're talking about the West specifically or outside of Asia, there really is only one place to start, and that's with the icon Bruce Lee. Now, I don't want to talk about Bruce too much because there's so much about Bruce Lee out there already in books, recent documentary Be Water as well. but we have to start there because that's just the place where we have to go. So yeah, so Andrew, you know, when we talk about films like Enter the Dragon, The Big Boss, you know, they were huge impacts on. They were the first sort of Chinese films to really make an impact in Western mindsets, weren't they?
I mean, I'd say, I mean, it's kind of strange because growing up in the 70s, you know, I was born in 72. It kind of felt like Bruce Lee was always there, was always around. You always kind of saw him. You saw posters of him. I think the thought that actually he died in 73 didn't even occur to me. I remember, you know, you went to see Saturday Night Fever, and the lead, John Travolta's character in that, his icons on his wall, he's got Al Pacino on one wall and Bruce Lee on the other. So it's this kind of mystery about him and this kind of coolness that was there. And I think it was a lot later that, you know, that I actually even saw something like Enter the Dragon. I remember well before that, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old at some sort of fete or something, and pestering my parents to get one of those Bruce Lee poster mags, you know, and you know, I'm really being very happy with it. But actually getting to see Bruce Lee at that point, you know, being, you know, that was before there was even video, and I've you know, maybe even Enter the Dragon had been on TV. It would be a lot later, but it was. Kung Fu generally as a cultural thing. I was thinking about it, you know, it's like, you know, the early 70s, you've got Kung Fu totally takes over cinema and it's making such a massive impact that you start to get it appearing everywhere. And then by the late 70s, you've got disco, and in the middle, you've got that overlap, musical overlap of Kung Fu and disco. It was really, it was around, it was everywhere. It was inevitable that I was so kind of entranced by it. It was inevitable that it was going to pull me in at some point, but actually the access to seeing stuff was a lot later. It just knew it was there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to add at the beginning. If anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, can you put them in the chat, and then when we're done, then I'll have a look through and ask everyone to unmute themselves to ask their questions as well. Sorry about that. Yeah. So carrying on from that, I think it was a funny time, because, you know, James Bond started using karate. I can't remember which film it was now, but that kind of legitimized karate in the West. And then suddenly there was this huge sort of explosion of karate. And then you had Bruce in the Green Hornet firstly, and then he went back to Asia and started making some films, came back, you know, and just made a huge splash in the West. And then after that, we follow on with the Shaw Brothers and how those films sort of took on popularity as well. So this kind of leads us quite nicely, because if we look at sort of Jim Kelly as well in Enter the Dragon, becoming a really big sort of black icon as well. So this leads us on to the discussion with Josh, I think. There we go, look at that. Came prepared. So as I said before, Josh made a great video of why black people love Kung Fu. Now, for people who might not have seen the video, do you want to just give us a quick summary of what you explored in that video and what you talked about, and then we'll dive into it a little further?
Yeah, so, I mean, for everyone that hasn't seen the film, the video that I made, basically I came to it after listening to a fantastic interview on this American podcast called The Nod. And Eric Eddings, who was it's not running anymore. They do something else on Quibi, but he was hosting that episode, and he did this brilliant interview with RZA from the Wu-Tang. And they just he also did an interview with Master Sifu, who is a choreographer for Avatar: The Last Airbender. And he was basically looking at this question of kind of the cultural impact of Kung Fu with black audiences. And they're great interviews, and I was kind of entranced. And also it was a bit of a light bulb moment, because I was kind of, everything aligned in my appreciation of Kung Fu kind of growing up, and it just sent me down a deep rabbit hole. So I decided to make a video about it, which is what I tend to do when I go down a rabbit hole. But yeah, it's essentially talking about the kind of the history of how Kung Fu films rose to popularity in the States, and the direct impact it had with black audiences there. And then, you know, that there's definite crossover with other countries, namely the UK, that I can speak to personally, and Marlon will also elaborate on this. But what my video and what I'm going to talk about is specifically you quite US focused, and I think it's worth, you know, thinking about the fact that the UK does have its own story to tell about kung fu films and cultural impact with black audiences, and that deserves telling in its own right. But yeah, the video, I won't go into too much detail. You can just watch it. I will talk about some other things that I'll kind of go through the history. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'd say I'm more of an enthusiast, unlike my fellow panelists. But I did get quite deep down this rabbit hole. I don't know if you want me to go into this now, Weng, or did you want me to just?
Yeah, I mean, well, you might as well explain it for everyone. So, how did the black community? Because I think a lot of us, well, for me especially, like when I was growing up here, a lot of my black friends really loved kung fu films. I never knew why. I couldn't figure out why. So
yeah.
You know.
Well, another caveat to say is that I don't have any kind of definitive answers for this. I'm making kind of observations and correlations, which definitely had a strong impact. But everyone's going to have their own personal connection to the genre.
Yeah,
you know, so that it's worth, you know, I'm not speaking for everybody. You know, the black community or communities, because there's many, you know, we're not a monolith. So I want, you know, people to bear that in mind. I started the video I made with a clip from Game of Death, which I think encapsulates a lot of the parts of this story, because you've got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you know, one of the greatest basketballers of all time, black basketballer, very popular in the US at the time. And Game of Death was, you know, it was made in '73 and released posthumously. And it was released later on. It wasn't kind of one of the initial releases in the US for the Bruce Lee films, Golden Harvest. And it's interesting to think about that, because it kind of it indicates the marketing strategy that they kind of landed on. And I didn't really realize this until reading into it deeper, but there was definitely a strategy and a kind of a tactic. The marketing towards African-American audiences was definitely contrived. It was something that Warner Brothers and the Shaw Brothers, Warner Brothers was one of the main distributors for Kung Fu films at the time. And that's what they were aiming at. They saw the correlation, the crossovers with blaxploitation storylines and the themes.
Yeah.
And they even, you know, so they were releasing them. First of all, they're very cheap. The cinema industry was in a kind of financial crisis at the time in the 70s. We're talking kind of 73, 74. So these were cheap exports that they could pick up and then screen in predominantly kind of grindhouse cinemas. What they called then were grindhouse cinemas, which would show, you know, porn, schlock horror movies, B movies. And they were mainly in kind of inner city locations. So where you'd have predominantly black communities. At that time, you had racial segregation laws. You had white flight to the suburbs. So most of the people going to these cinemas were black. And they would often show them back to back with blaxploitation films. So you would have a double bill. And so this kind of, they were definitely trying to funnel these films to black people. And that kind of explains how so many black people were watching Kung Fu films at the time. It doesn't explain why it resonated so strongly. So it's only part of the story. But just to give an idea, you had stuff like Five Fingers of Death. Hold on, I've got a list here. Yeah, you got Five Fingers of Death. You know, Triple Irons, Man of Iron, the new One-Armed Swordsman. You had Fist of Fury and The Big Boss, all coming out in '74. Although Fist of Fury, I don't know if it was Fist of Fury and The Big Boss. One of them came out prior to that, but it was only a limited release, which is why I didn't mention that in the video. So I think they did a double bill kind of rollout later on in '74. So Five Fingers of Death, most people agree. Like I say, I'm not an expert, so you might disagree, but Five Fingers of Death, I think most people agree, is the first kung fu film that came out in the States in '74. So it was a big year, you know, and they were just flooding.
Andrew's got it.
They were everywhere. Like Andrew said, the cinemas were just flooded with these films.
If you don't mind me kind of just interjecting here, I mean, this is quite a nice little anecdote, but I remember reading a blog, and this is kind of taking it out from being from the US, but a blog by a guy who runs an independent cinema in New Zealand, and he took it over in the 70s. And the reason is because my wife, when she was a student, she used to work there. But it's how I know about this. But it was interesting. He says it at some point. You know, again, it kind of speaks to the state of the movie industry at that point. But basically, kung fu films saved his cinema. And I mean, he's still there, still running it. But it was very shortly after he took over. Those were the films that would play well to audiences.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that because one of the things that really stood out for me, Josh, in your video was about the themes of empowerment that run through kung fu films. Because the standard sort of martial arts story is the good guy at the beginning gets beaten up and oppressed, and then he trains and becomes stronger, and then he comes back to take on his oppressors, but doing it while remaining pure to the how do I say it, the pure, staying strong of body and mind, because martial arts is strong in body and mind. So it's not about revenge, but it's about kind of proving a point, I guess, and saying that he gets strong, he can be strong. And that really connected with Black audiences.
For sure, yeah. And what just a little point to what Andrew was saying. I think there's a lot of people that write about that, and also that say that African American communities were the biggest driver of that financial kind of rescue as well. If it wasn't for the popularity of kung fu films with African American communities specifically, then it may not have got the kind of same financial boon that it did because of kung fu films. So that's quite interesting. Just a few before I move on to the themes, which I'm about to. Thanks, Weng. I need some encouragement to move on. There's so much to say. But there's a few stats that I thought I'd mention. And there's a study at a movie theatre in New Brunswick, New Jersey in June 74. Well, from June 74 to May 75. And they had 32 blaxploitation films screened in that time and 27 martial art films. And I think that kind of speaks to the dominance of, that's in a year, the dominance of those genres in the movie theatres at the time. Also, African Americans made up about a third of all moviegoers nationally. So it was
many.
Yeah, it was a big financial kind of. I mean, you can see why the studios were really pushing for that audience. So in terms of the themes, you're totally right. I mean, and that's the interesting thing about that, about the kind of, rising up against oppression and persecution, whether it's kind of imperialist Japan or, it was a bit more nuanced with some of the Bruce Lee films, which maybe other people can speak to, but his specific relationship with Black audiences is worth really kind of digging into, because it was him as a personality was also a massive draw for various reasons. There's whole documentaries about it, but his kind of split with, or the Golden Harvest split with Shaw Brothers is quite interesting in the sense that they got a lot of these themes in terms of the class representation and how what he embodied in terms of class was also quite attractive to audiences. But the Shaw Brothers kind of reconceptualized how the themes in their martial arts movies. So they moved away from kind of the more mysticism towards these themes that you're talking about kind of the revenge motif, or the downtrodden, the kind of walking the earth like Cain, avenging your master kind of idea. And that was, I think that was key. I mean, others can talk better to this, but in the popularity, especially with Black audiences. I mean, there's so many examples of this, that there's so many these storylines that follow that kind of pattern. You know, Fist of Fury, also known as Chinese Connection. You've got the famous sign outside the park. No Chinese, and you know, Five Fingers of Death. It's a similar thing, avenging the death of their master, and Hammer of God as well had a kind of gang of Japanese karate thugs. So yeah, resistance and vengeance were common themes, and self-improvement and determination, all of these things, and these themes were also present in blaxploitation films. Blaxploitation films were the only other genre where you had kind of action films that didn't have white heroes.
Yeah.
So if you're a black person in America or in the UK or wherever you are, you can't go and cheer on a hero in an action film in this kind of high octane, fast paced entertainment. Cinema was not really for you. You couldn't imagine yourself. I mean, part of the appeal of action films is that you imagine yourself as the hero.
Yeah.
And what would you do in the situation? Kind of, it's quite self-affirming. It's that nice escapism, and we just didn't have that. So kung fu films as having non-white heroes was also a big draw.
Yeah, definitely. No, because actually I'd never sort of picked up on that until I saw your video as well. I think this is a good point for us to talk to Marlon as well, because I think Marlon, you kind of lived that life almost that we're describing here, but in the UK. So did you have that kind of feeling as well when you watched them about sort of non-white heroes and the themes of oppression that Josh has talked about?
Of course, that's all I can say. Absolutely, that is what it was all about, in a sense that we could see, you know. And obviously, I've got to go back to Bruce. You know, we trying to avoid Bruce, but Bruce was the, for myself growing up, again, as you know, I think it was what Andrew said. On my bedroom wall was one side was Muhammad Ali and the other side was Bruce Lee. Those are the two. So it was a time of resistance. We had to be, you know, it was a daily fight for us. You know, being born here, growing up here in the 70s. You know, I'm born '63. I'm a lot older than I look. But yeah, we every day, you know, you stepped out your house, you knew there could be problems. And it wasn't just, you know, racist, it was also the police. And well, some of them were racist themselves. But so it was an everyday sort of thing. So Bruce Lee was almost, when we saw someone like Bruce Lee, when I saw someone like Bruce Lee, it wasn't that, oh, Bruce Lee was a good fighter and that sort of thing, and which he was, but it was that he wasn't taking no crap from no one, and he would retaliate. If you're going to try and put him down, he's going to put you in your place. And that's how we felt, basically. We felt the same way. So it was showing us, you know, that we could retaliate or we could respond. You didn't have to put up with the crap. And obviously, many of us went and actually learned martial arts to be able to do it properly and do it, you know, like Bruce Lee. And you know, and with Bruce again, you know, the whole coolness that was the 70s, about being cool. And you know, we as black guys, black men, we saw ourselves as being cool. So we you know, there was a lot of ourselves that we saw in people like Bruce Lee and obviously Muhammad Ali and those sort of people. So Bruce Lee was an icon. So yeah, it was an everyday struggle, everyday fight. It was about again, you know, fighting against the system not welcoming us and accepting us as we would have liked them to, or we thought they were going to. And obviously going back to you know, Fist of Fury. I clearly remember that, because again, you know, it was the same thing here. Obviously in the 60s and sort of 50s, when we had the Windrush generation, at the generation of Caribbeans who came to the UK from the Caribbean, from places like Jamaica. My parents were Jamaican. You know, when they arrived here, they were invited here to come here to help rebuild Britain after the war, and to take up jobs that some of the white folks didn't want to do. And you know, they had to encounter things like signs like no dogs, no Irish, and no blacks, which was very similar to obviously, you know, what we saw in the Fist of Fury sort of film. So we very much sort of connected with all of, you know, the resistance, fighting back, but being cool while you fight back. You know, and yeah, just not taking no crap from anyone, basically. So Bruce was very much a symbol for me growing up. So yeah, I you know, I connect with all that, and differently to the Americans, as I say, it was, I don't know, I just feel, because I've sat and watched a lot of those documentaries on you know, the African American scene, and to me it was a bit more different, because I didn't really grow up with the blaxploitation movies. I started seeing blaxploitation movies later, much later. It was basically, it was, you know, we were looking for black heroes on TV that could represent us. That, you know, we, you know, obviously Sidney Poitier, but Sidney Poitier was a more smooth guy, you know, the nice, the polite guy sort of thing. He wasn't the guy going to smash you in your face, you know. And then obviously the people like Woody Strode. Woody Strode was the black man, the black guy who was in Spartacus. He was in a few cowboy movies as well. He was an ex-wrestler, as I found out later on. He was a wrestling star and went into the movies. So people like Woody Strode, but we were looking, there weren't many black heroes that we could see on TV that looked like us. And that was the issue for us. So, you know, we adopted Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, well, you know, we adopted him and he became our hero.
Yeah, so I mean, did you have this, when we talked about sort of this, the cinemas in America showing a lot of Kung Fu films, was that a similar thing here?
Of course. We had late night cinema, Friday late night cinema. I grew up going to cinema on a Friday night, late night, 11 o'clock at night, and watching Kung Fu films. And there was a whole plethora of cinemas, especially, I'm from North London. I grew up in Tottenham, the notorious area of Tottenham. And around that area in North London, we had at least 4 or 5 cinemas that we used to go to, basically.
Yeah.
So
and they would all show all night, would they? They'd roll the films all night?
No, it's just one film for the night. Just one film for the night.
Oh, the late night, okay.
Yeah, so it was a late night cinema. So we used to go on a Friday night with our mates, and we used to all go up to Holloway Odeon in Holloway. We were living in Tottenham at that time, so it's a good few miles, and we would have to walk back home. Afterwards, we would kung fu kick our way all the way back home, basically. I don't know, 5 miles or longer than, or more than that, basically. Yeah, because there was no late night buses, I think the buses were like one every hour in those days or something like that.
Yeah, and how much would it cost as well to go to one of those late night screenings?
Oh my gosh. God, I can't even remember that now. I definitely cannot. But you can imagine it'd be like something. God, I never thought about that one. I can't remember how much we paid, but I'm sure it'd be something like maybe 30p, 40p, 50p, something like that in those days. Ridiculous amounts that people probably couldn't imagine 50p or something like that.
Yeah, because I just want to kind of make that connection of cheap cinema, because you know we talked about grindhouse cinemas, they're cheap.
It was cheap because look, we were broke and we were young guys. We weren't working, so that was our pocket money in a sense that we would have, or paper round money or something like that. So it was very cheap. I can't remember how much we paid now to go, but yeah, we had a number of cinemas. So where I was, we had Holloway Odeon, and this is all late night cinema. So anyway, we had late night cinema on a Friday night at 11 o'clock. It was about 11 o'clock, to quite late, to about 1. And then we also had Sunday afternoon. We had Sunday afternoon. So we had to go to like Dalston, Stoke Newington. We had to go to the Rio Astra Cinema, which is now a mosque. We had to go there on a Sunday afternoon about 4 o'clock and watch films. And then the rest of them were all late night cinema. And we had, Holloway Odeon, we had Wood Green Cinema, Odeon in Wood Green. Then at the bottom of my grandmother's road, later on, we had a cinema, the Curzon Cinema, and we used to go and watch films there. So in my area, there was quite a number of cinemas that we used to go to, but it was always generally late night cinema. It was fantastic. It was a night out for us, basically. It was a night out, and then, like I said, we all come out, everyone's doing their martial art movements and jumping on the street and walking home. And yeah, that was great times, great memories, you know. And at the time, I myself had started to, I took up martial arts. Because my older brother, my step brother, I grew up with sort of step parents, and my step brother Delroy was a black belt in karate, and he also was part of the England team in those days, and he used to teach me at home, and I started to learn martial arts from about 13, karate at that time, and eventually also he set up his own youth club, so he had a club, his own fitness club in the local area. And I would have to go and help him set up, basically, and set up the horse that we all jumped over, and the punch bag, and the mats, and all that kind of stuff, and all the local. So we used to get local youths that used to come there and do martial arts, and we learned street fighting, karate, boxing, judo. We learned everything, basically. And to this day, I still stretch, and I still do my kicks and everything like that. You know, so yeah, it was a whole experience. And again, also, I used to also make nunchuckers and sell them at school. So yeah, I used to buy broom handles and do it quite expertly as well. Cut the broom handles into pieces.
Are you part of the reason?
Huh?
Are you part of the reason that those scenes got cut from the films?
Man, could be. I don't know. Yeah, we used to walk with them on the streets and carry them. We used to carry them.
Wow. The love of parents.
I remember people used to make, when I was started secondary school, there were kids who made the sort of ninja throwing stars in metalwork class.
Yeah, I took it. I actually used to sell them in school, and so we used to buy the broom handles and buy the electrical tape, black electrical tape or red electrical tape, put it around it, drill the hole in the middle, and through it with the chain, and they were quite professional, and I was quite good at it. I could flip it around my foot and flip it up and catch it and all that sort of stuff, and we used to do demonstrations in school. In our school, we had sort of a hill. We had a hill, and the playground was sort of a bit lower down. And we used to stand on the hill and do demonstrations. And
if you film those with the kind of Shaw style as well, put the music on, so fun.
We didn't have the ability to film in those days. It was like some big old camera or something like that, or some video camera. Yeah, it wasn't like these days. Yeah, so that was my whole experience, basically. So I was fully immersed in the whole thing, as well as you know, the struggle, looking for people that we can resonate with, like Bruce Lee, and you know, them sort of almost replacing the black heroes that we want to see.
Yeah. So just a quick question, sorry. So those screenings, those late night screenings, were they mostly black people going to those as well? Like, were they?
It was all black. It was all black people. This is what when I sit and watch some of these programs, and I say black because I remember it all being black people. Yeah. It was all black guys in there, and obviously you know us already. I don't think there'd be too many white guys that wanted to be around us because we were very everyone was. People were talking, shouting.
So would it get rowdy?
It was very rowdy. It was, and especially when there was a signature move, or you know, like Warriors 2, when the ending scene, when Casanova Wong jumps over the table backwards and he gives him that final kick. Oh my God, the whole cinema was down. The whole cinema.
I'm glad you mentioned the Astra Cinema in Stoke Newington, because that's my dad would drag my mum on dates there to watch late night late night kung fu screenings.
No,
I only found out about that after I made the video.
That's funny, because I was saying to these guys earlier, because one of my older black friends who's from the Windrush generation, he said to me not long ago, he said that when Bruce films were on, he said those cinemas, they would show Bruce films every Sunday, sort of a late showing on Sunday. And he said if you wanted to watch those films, you had to get to cinema at 4 p.m. For a late evening screening. The queue would be round the block.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another quick connection as well. I don't think people realize how big also martial art films was in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica. Jamaica there's a cinema called the Carib in Kingston. that used to show kung fu films like every Sunday on a Sunday as well, and that used to be packed out as well. So martial art films were big in, you know, like cowboy films. Cowboy films and martial art films were big in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, as I knew as well. So I think that tradition also came with the people who came here, and then we sort of all kind of grew up into it.
Yeah,
it's worth mentioning.
I think also
countries across the continent of Africa as well share this love. The audiences there share this love. I spent time in Zanzibar when I was studying, because I studied Swahili, and there's an old cinema in Zanzibar that's kind of only frequented by the people that live there. There's no tourists go there, and during Ramadan, because it's mainly Muslim, at lunchtime, to avoid the heat and to kind of distract from the hunger of Ramadan, the cinema is packed, purely men, and it is just wall to wall, like triple bill, quadruple bill kung fu films every day. Yeah, which is to this even now, and they're using and they're using old recordings that they've had for decades. And it's, I was in heaven when I discovered that. I was like, oh my God.
You like the old
literally went there every day, and it cost about 10p as well.
Yeah, and I think also with those, you know, we talked about it briefly, but you had those ready-made black heroes as well, like Jim, you know, we talked about Jim Kelly, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You know, it's funny how they, you know, just going back to Enter the Dragon quickly, it's funny how they were portrayed in those films, because you had sort of the main stars are Bruce, obviously, Jim Kelly and Jim Saxon. And it's kind of a reflection of the times, I think, because actually Jim Saxon's character was the one who was supposed to die, but he refused to die. So instead they switched it to Jim Kelly, and Jim Kelly was the one who died instead. And then there was those
the black man
died, exactly, yeah, because the black man always dies first, right? And then, and also like there was kind of enforcing those stereotypes as well, because, you know, Jim Kelly was like the cool guy who got all the women, you know, Jim Saxon was this, you know, white master, kind of very calm and stuff. And then with Bruce as well, like Bruce is Bruce, but they wouldn't let him, like, he meets the female agent, but there's no hint of any romanticism or anything like that. And it's kind of keeping everyone in their places, because that was a kung fu film written by a white man, basically. That was like all the other Bruce films are written in Asia, produced and written with Asians as well. Whereas that one, it's quite definitive. The kind of the stereotypes in it is seen very clearly, or the definitions of the characters are seen very clearly. And what that leads me on to actually is also Angela Mao's character, because, you know, she dies pretty quickly early on, and there's some insinuation of bad things that are going to happen to her as well, which was very common back then. Whereas if you make that film in Asia, she's going around kicking ass as well, right?
I don't know if this is I'm just thinking about this now, but I don't know. I know that you can pretty much point to kung fu films' popularities as killing off the blaxploitation genre, pretty much, because they replaced blaxploitation films in the cinemas. Like I was saying, they were screened at similar times in similar venues. But I wonder if that is part of it, because all the blaxploitation films, by and large, were made by white people, and they were very problematic. They had similar themes of resistance and kind of the drawing from the Black Power movement, Pan-African movement. You know, these themes were there, and they transposed quite well with audiences. But I do think that maybe, as you said, you know, the kind of negative elements of blaxploitation films was its downfall when kung fu films arrived and basically stole the show.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there was some crossover as well between kung fu and blaxploitation at the beginning.
Definitely.
Well.
I mean, there was. I was going to mention that there was Cleopatra Jones. That I can't remember which one, because there's a few of them, but one of them was specifically a joint production between the Shaw Brothers and Warner Brothers. So that was a perfect example of what you're talking about, basically.
And even Dolomite, Dolomite, which they had a remake last year with Eddie Murphy. Because funny enough, and I've never seen this before, I actually found a film the other day, just recently. Obviously, since we've spoken about doing this, and then I've come across this. I was doing a bit of research, and I came across this film, and I've never seen this film before. And it was Dolomite, but it's a Shaolin film. It's with Eugene, another black martial artist who came out. He started a film called the Black Shaolin Monk. Eugene Thomas, a guy called Eugene Thomas, and he starred in a film with Dolomite, and I'm sure it's oh yeah, I remember that. They made it with Alexander Lau.
Yeah.
What is he? He's a taekwondo, isn't he? Taekwondo expert, if I remember right. And it's got Eugene Thomas, and it's got Dolomite starring. It's a blaxploitation martial arts film with all the crappy language, which I can't, it does my head in, with the way they talk. Hey, jive, it's all the jive, you know, you jive, but all that sort of stuff. So it's, yeah, it was crazy. I was watching it the other day and I was killing myself. It was so funny. It was so funny, basically. I'm trying to I'll find the name of it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to have to kind of move on from this topic now because we still have plenty to get through still. Matt said it's Cleopatra Jones and the Casino of Gold is the film. So thanks, Matt.